Hello, and welcome to this episode of The Creature Teachers. With me is Rick, and my name is Talia, and today we're going to be discussing all kinds of different reptiles. And how are you, Rick?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. What
Great.
kind of reptiles do we have today?
Well, we're going to talk about pretty much all the reptiles. We won't see all of them, but we do have a good assortment of reptiles today. And I guess probably the things that we associate with reptiles most are snakes. We always talk about snakes. So we'll start with snakes right now. And we here in New England have a number of different species of snakes, including several that are venomous, but we don't see them quite often. They're quite rare around here. But we brought some today, and one of them, a lot of people think that they're a venomous snake because they look very venomous, but they are not. And so what we're trying to do is to get people to understand that you're probably not going to see a whole lot of venomous snakes around you, and that the ones you do see are really quite harmless and could be good for the ecology of the area too. So let's start off with one that's common. And it's not the most common snake. Most of the time when we see or hear of a snake, and when I talk to kids, and they usually say, well, I've seen a snake, and it was a garter snake. Most of the time we're seeing garter snakes in black and yellow, and they have stripes that run down them.
They're so hard to catch.
Right. This is another quite common snake. I see these around my house quite often. And this is an eastern milk snake.
Oh, he's so pretty.
Yes, and they're one of my favorites. He just shed his skin, and when a snake sheds his skin, he sheds the entire thing. And so what he will do is the skin separates from the underskin, winds up being able to use his nose to rub against a rock or something, and then he actually removes it. It's like taking a sock off, exactly. And so when you see, lots of times we'll see snake sheddings, and they're usually all in one piece. They're very interesting creatures. This one, a lot of times people will see it, and because of the pattern on it, they assume that it's a venomous snake.
Yeah,
and
I can see that.
It is not.
It's so cool.
Lots of times these guys kind of do themselves in, because one of the things that they will do if they are threatened is they will rattle their tail in the leaves. So of course when they do this, you're going to assume that this is a rattlesnake,
right.
And lots of people kill them because they assume it's a venomous snake. They do have a wonderful pattern on them. This of course helps them to camouflage. They're going to be able to get into leaf litter and such and not be able to be seen too much. They are a constrictor, which means they squeeze their food. And these primarily are going to eat small rodents. Somebody showed me a photograph of one that was actually eating another snake. And this is quite common with king snakes, but I had not heard that milk snakes will do this too. But this was eating a fairly large garter snake, so they will eat other things. Now, you'll notice also, Talia, that he is sticking his tongue out at you.
Yes.
And that's not because he's being rude. He's actually doing something here.
He is thermo-smelling the air.
Yeah, basically what he's doing is he is sticking his tongue out, and his tongue is not like ours.
Oh,
he's got a forked tongue. And the forked tongue comes out, and it wiggles around, and it picks up little particles of the air, brings it back into his mouth, and up into the roof of his mouth, where he's got something called a Jacobson's organ. And those 2 points of his tongue go up there and pretty much let him know everything that's going on around him. So what he's doing is he's smelling the air. And this is important for him, because if you look at his head, you'll notice that he's missing a couple of other things too. Do you notice something on the side of his head that's not
those
there?
like big pits for venom. Those like big buffy jaws.
No, actually what he's missing is ears. We're not seeing any external ears on him. And the other thing is that I always tell kids that he's going to wind up winning a staring contest with anybody in this room, because he doesn't have any eyelids either. But if you think about this, with an animal like this that has to shed his skin all in one piece, he certainly can't pull it off with his hands because he doesn't have any. So to be able to do this, if he had eyelids and he had ears, this would be a prime place for that to tear. He would not be able to shed his skin correctly, and he'd never be able to shed. Snakes look like they're slimy. I think you can see in the light here that he's got this shiny. Yeah, he's got this very shiny, almost wet look.
Yeah.
But he is not. These are cold-blooded animals.
Very cool, very
so
dry.
So he is quite dry. and smooth and cool because, again, he's at the mercy of the temperature around him. He likes being handled because our hands are warm and we're warming him up a bit. And so he is going to have to thermoregulate. When he wants to warm up, he's going to have to go someplace and sun himself. When he wants to cool off, he'll go in the shade or maybe even in the water sometimes. But that's how these guys would wind up thermoregulating.
They have some really good anti-predator deterrent because they look like a venomous snake on top. You think they look like a rattlesnake, and then on the bottom they kind of look like a bushmaster, which is also a venomous snake. Not from here, really, but.
So they're a really cool snake, and one of my favorites around here. Interestingly enough, it's kind of funny how they got their name milk snake. Milk snake, and what surprises me is that milk snakes come in all kinds of different colors and everything. The milk snake that we see out in the western United States that has the black and yellow rings on it is the same milk snake as this, same species, just a different color. So they're very interesting as to the color of where they come from. But this milk snake got its name because farmers would find them in their barn.
Oh, with the cows?
And they assumed that because they're in the barn that they're actually milking their cows. So I know it sounds ridiculous to us, but this was an old wives' tale that many farmers believed in. So they would kill the snakes when they found them.
No.
Now, once they
rats.
realized that these were eating the mice that were in their barn, and of course the mice are eating all of the cow's food.
Why do I have so many mice all of a sudden?
Exactly. Now they're saying, hey, these things are not bad, and if they could, lots of people don't like snakes, but if they can tolerate them, they're more than happy to leave them in their barns.
So pretty. He has a heart
What I'm
in
going to
his
do is
head.
I'm going to hand him off to you because we have his southern cousin with us as well.
This one is the tricky one visually, right? You
Well,
think he looks like something else.
yeah, these ones are they're
Oh, he's so shiny.
they look somewhat similar in their color. Or not so much their color, but at their pattern. Okay, and this is a corn snake.
Wow.
This is an albino version of the corn snake, and there's a lot of different color morphs of corn snakes too. So we see them, and we see them being raised in captivity quite often. Lots of hobbyists use these, and they'll breed them to get different color and stuff out of them.
You can see these in the pet stores a lot.
Right, you'll see these quite often. If somebody was looking for a snake for a pet, lots of times people get these because they don't get super big. They're fairly easy to keep. They don't require the same really, really high temperatures that many other reptiles require. So they're quite easy to keep and breed. So many people do that. But this would be from more of a southeastern United States. You're going to find these in the Carolinas and I believe all the way up into Virginia. But for the most part, when you get farther north, you're going to see this snake instead. So they're cousins. They kind of fit in the same ecosystem. You'll see them in cornfields, again around barns and stuff. But one of the reasons they call them corn snakes is because they find them in cornfields. And the reason they find them in cornfields, they're eating those rodents
the rats and the birds. And
so we see quite a few of these in those. And these are they're again a very common snake.
So docile.
Now, a lot of times when we see this, we see snakes and they look an awful lot like worms, but they are not. They do have bones. And it's one of the things that many people don't realize is that snakes do have bones. As a matter of fact, this snake probably has more bones than we do because it's got a very long backbone.
It's like all
and
ribcage.
each one of these little pieces of backbone, each vertebrae, has a set of ribs that comes off of it. So when you see this, you'll see it kind of looks like a very elongated rib cage if you were to take an x-ray of this snake.
Yeah.
But this does allow them to be able to move around and articulate because each one of these vertebrae is so small. But it also is necessary for a snake like this to have a backbone. Because if you're an earthworm, you don't have a backbone. But if you pick up an earthworm, you can see that it gets really long, and then you put it down, it gets short again. It can move around quite a bit. But it's not a very strong animal because those muscles don't have anything to attach to. Whereas a snake needs to be very strong because it needs to squeeze its prey. So those muscles have to attach to something solid, its backbone, and that allows it to be able to have the strength that's required to be able to constrict its prey. So,
the corn snake actually looks quite a bit like a python, just
Yeah,
the way
and,
that they look
not
comparatively.
quite as fat as a python, but we see that a lot of snakes are.
Whoa! Look at the rainbow. That's amazing.
So we see a lot of these snakes being very diverse as far as their thickness too. Some snakes are quite thick. We see eastern water snakes and everything tend to have a much thicker body, and a lot of the bigger constrictors,
Like
the boas and
moccasins,
stuff like that, have a bigger
cottonmouth.
body. Yep. And so if you were down south and you saw water moccasins or something, they also have a much thicker body than these snakes do. So I'm going to get these guys back in here, or at least this one. You can hang on to that one a second, because we're going to bring out another animal here. Oh, and by the way, the reason we put them in bags is because they can get out of everything else. And there's always, there's always concern. I always have kids asking me, well, how can they breathe in there? Well, it's a cloth bag. It's just like a surgical mask. Of course, doctors can breathe through their surgical masks, and it's the same thing. It's made out of the same material so that they can breathe right through this. The only thing they can't do is get out of this, and that's why we put them in here. Okay. So now, what would the difference be between, say, a snake and a lizard?
Well, legs.
You would think legs. That would make a whole lot of sense. And when we're talking about reptiles, we're talking about let me see, crocodilians. We're talking about snakes. We're talking about turtles. We're talking about lizards. We're talking about something called a tuatara, which is a very lizard-like single species from New Zealand, and very weird animal, and worm lizards as well. But one of the things that we would assume if we were looking at something like a lizard, we would think that lizards, because they have legs, would be closely related to things like crocodilians. They look very similar to a crocodile or an alligator. However, lizards are squamates, and so are snakes. And snakes and lizards are very closely related. And to prove a point here, we've brought a lizard with us. And when you see him, you'll wonder what the story is, because he certainly does not look like a lizard. He looks much more like a snake. And what we have here is what's known as a legless lizard. Now, it seems fairly obvious when we have a lizard that has no legs, but when you look at him, he looks very snake-like. But if you look very closely, you can see there's quite a few differences between the two. And so, give me an example of some of the differences, Talia.
Well, the lizards, comparatively to snakes, will have a longer tail and a shorter body.
And we could see that here with him. If we were to look under here, this is where his body ends, and this is where his tail begins. And if we look at the snake here, we'll notice that
just a little tail and a long
he does.
body.
His body ends right here, and that's where his, oops, sorry about that, guy. And that's where his tail begins, right here. So he has a much smaller tail to body ratio than this guy does. His tail is about maybe half, maybe even a little bit longer than half of the length of his body. So he's got a very almost equal length body to his tail. There's a lot of other things that are a bit different here too. One of those is that, look closely at his head and tell me what we're seeing here.
I see ears.
Yeah, he's got ears. He's got external ears. And those external ears are something that you will not notice in a snake. Snakes feel vibrations very well, but they don't have an external ear like lizards do. And I know a lot of people, once you tell them that this is a lizard, they look at it and they go, yeah, it really kind of does.
See a lizard.
You can really see a lizard with this, except it doesn't have any legs. But the other thing we notice with him is, we were talking about eyelids before and how this guy doesn't have any eyelids. Lizards do. Most lizards do, I should say. Not all lizards. Some things, like there's some geckos that don't have an eyelid. But these guys do, and so they can close their eyes, and that makes a big difference. What I notice very distinctly is the scales are quite a bit different.
Oh, yeah.
What we're seeing here is some almost like an armor plating compared to that. Yeah, and we're not seeing if we look at the belly on this snake, we're seeing a much different scale than on the back. We're seeing a scale that goes straight across the belly, and the belly is very flat. And this allows the snake to be able to slither along. It's using its muscles to move, because obviously it has no other form of locomotion there. And these guys just don't have that. But because they do have this great armor plating, when we look along the sides of this lizard, what we're seeing is a very long line here, and that line allows its body to expand when it breathes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So on this particular legless lizard, it's called a sheltopusik. We have a lot of lizards legless lizards from around the world. We do have some here in the United States. This one happens to be more Eastern European, and he's actually doing quite well today. Sometimes he doesn't like to be handled, and he'll actually spin around in a circle.
Oh.
But I've heard a lot of strange things about these guys. They can live a long, long time, up to 50 years, which is a long time. And this is probably the easiest lizard I've ever had to take care of. He lives in leaf litter, and we give him mealworms and other insects for food. And that's really what he does. That's how he behaves. This guy needs to eat mice. We don't give him live mice, but he does eat mice. And we'll also notice, and we can't see him, he's not sticking his tongue out, but he has a much different tongue than, he just stuck his tongue out
he
there.
did?
So, yeah.
Yes, it's like
that?
it's got a notch in
Yeah.
it instead of two forks.
Yeah. But it does give us some idea of how similar snakes and lizards truly are. We brought a crocodilian with us. Okay.
Oh.
Now, what's very interesting about crocodilians is there's about 24 species of crocodilians. So we find them all over the world as well, in tropical and subtropical areas, but primarily we're going to find them in tropical areas. Crocodilians are usually quite large, and I say that everything is relative, but we have crocodilians that can get from 6 feet all the way up to, say, 25 feet. And these big, huge saltwater crocodiles that we see, or mugger crocodiles that we see, can be really, really large. So we see several species that are quite large.
They get very
and
big.
Crocodilians come in all shapes and forms. We've got gharials. We've got crocodiles. There's about 10 species. Well, I'm sorry, about 14 species of crocodile. There's only 2 species of alligator, and this happens to be one of those. This is an American alligator, and I'll hand him off to you, Talia, so you can hold on to him for a second. You'll feel how cool he is.
He's really cold.
He's gonna wake up once we start holding him a lot.
He feels like a
and
dragon.
when he starts to bite, I wanted to hand him to you. Oh, no, I'm only kidding. So this is a baby. He's about 2 years old. They can grow at different rates. It really depends an awful lot on how warm they're kept and how much they're fed. And there's some very, very bizarre things about alligators and crocodiles.
What a weird creature.
They feel very strange,
fake.
don't they?
Fake.
When you look at him, he looks like he's very scaly.
Yeah.
And when you feel him, he feels a lot
like
more
leather.
leathery. Exactly. And so American alligators we would find in the southern United States, specifically in the United States too. We don't really see them in South or Central America. We're going to see them in places like Texas, Louisiana, Florida. These are places that we see an awful lot of American alligators. And then there's a Chinese alligator too.
Yes.
Chinese alligators are...
They're little guys, right?
Yeah, they're smaller, but a lot more tenacity to them. They have I like American alligators because of their
pretty
disposition. They're at least something that we
They're
can
a
handle
notch
without
down.
having to worry about fingers missing. But Chinese alligators are in the same boat that American alligators were in a number of years ago.
Oh, no.
They're threatened. They're quite endangered at this
Purses
point.
and belts and boots.
Yes, and a lot of it has to do with overhunting. And in the U.S., that was the big problem with American alligators. We found that they were just hunted to near extinction, and they put them on the endangered species list, and they started to farm them. And when they did, they found that their populations came back considerably, and now they're once again a nuisance animal in places like South Florida. People get them in their swimming pools and what have you. And here's an animal that can get up to 15 feet long, so they do get rather large. They aren't an animal that really goes after people, but they have been known to attack people before. So, and most of the time when somebody is attacked, it's because
they're close to a nest or
yes,
something.
they're close to a nest, and the females are really good moms.
Very
they are wonderful moms. They can hear the babies when they're making noise as they're hatching out of their nests, and they'll dig up the nests and very, very gently pick the babies up with their mouths
gentle.
and bring them down to the
just
water
kind
and
of
put them in the water.
put them in the water.
So they're they're good moms. We also see American crocodiles here in the United States, but they're not just exclusive to the United States. We see them all the way down into South America. So we do see those crocodiles. They're a bit larger. They're rare here in the United States, but when I go to places like Belize and Costa Rica, they're quite common. Matter of fact, I see them more commonly than I see caimans, and caimans are supposed to be very, very common down there.
I love his webbed feet.
Yes, and we see some really cool things about them. And one is that they do have webbed feet, but they do primarily most of their swimming is done with their tail. They have a big, long, flattened tail here, and we see that that does a really good job of being able to swim back and forth. They're wonderful swimmers. They do need water, and not so much that they go in the water. They're using it primarily to cool down. We have an animal here that, again, cannot regulate its own body temperature, so it needs to do it externally.
And
what it's doing, it will open its mouth, and heat escapes from the mouth when the mouth is open.
All in Africa,
but this is done
open mouths.
Through moisture being exchanged through the air. And because of that, if they keep their mouth open, they're losing moisture as well as the heat. So they need to be able to have that moisture available to them. The other thing is, if they are coming out, they're going to sun themselves, they get to be 100 degrees. That's about as much as they can take. They're going to want to go back into the water, and that's the way that they thermoregulate. Now, one of the interesting things about them is, if we look at the back here, we'll notice these little ridges. And each one of these little bony plates underneath the skin here is called an osteoderm. And this allows this guy to be able to warm up. So his back is very dark, and dark colors absorb heat better. So he gets into the sun, and he warms up, and the blood flows through these osteoderms because they're very porous bone, and it really does to help to warm him up. It's almost like a car radiator, moving that blood around his body and heating up his whole body. You can really see his teeth here, and you'll notice that they are very long and sharp. And when he gets to be an adult, those are going to be huge teeth and extremely, extremely powerful jaws too.
Oh yeah.
And we see this with all crocodilians. They're all carnivores. They eat. I say that some are carrion eaters too. They'll eat just about anything, and they have the most acid in their stomach of any animal, so they can digest just about anything.
Wow.
And they can eat something that's been sitting there festering in the sun for months. It doesn't matter to them. So I mean, as disgusting as that sounds, it does give them a leg up on a lot of other animals, because they can eat just about anything. Now, they can go quite a long period of time without eating too. So
that's so cool.
Yeah.
You can actually see the skin, the flesh between the plates flexing.
And again, this allows them to be able to articulate their movements. If we look at the eye too, we've got an interesting thing with the eye. And I don't know if we can get him to do this, but let's turn him sideways so that we can get the camera.
Crocodiles don't do this, only alligators.
Yeah. All right. Watch this.
Aww.
We see, he's not going to let you do it. we see a membrane that goes from the front to the back, and that's closing, and that's called a nictitating membrane. And that allows him to be able to cover that up. And mostly you'd think it's because he goes underwater and he needs to wear those goggles when he goes underwater. But it's primarily because he's eating things that don't want to get eaten. And when he bites something, he is, this thing could turn around and scratch him. And if it scratches his eye and blinds him in one eye, that could be devastating for him. So he really wants to make sure that he maintains his eyesight. And he's not the only animal that have that. Frogs have that, and other animals have this as well. But crocodilians are really cool. The only one that they have a lot of trouble with, as far as being a man-eater, are Nile crocodiles.
Yeah, those are ferocious.
Yes, and what's interesting is that here in the United States, we see alligators in a lot of areas where there's a lot of human habitation. So you would think that there would be that problem there as well. We see them on the golf courses in Florida, and people just kind of walk around them. Yeah. They're just not as an aggressive crocodilian as something like the Nile crocodiles are. They're a very, very aggressive animal. So, and this one's fairly small. He is going to get quite a bit larger than this. They can live to be 60 years old. Usually in the wild, they're going to live to be about 35, maybe 40. And when you see one that size, that age,
years?
Yeah, I know it. When you see them that age, they're going to be a rather large crocodilian. So they have been known to be to get all the way up into areas where it could frost.
Wow.
And some people have actually seen them under the ice sometimes. So again, they don't their metabolism is such that they don't use an awful lot of energy.
So neat.
And this helps them out a lot too, because they can go, up to 6 months without eating anything. And when they're eating something, they could digest it. They do need the heat to be able to digest their food. So, one of the things about them is they need to maintain that body temperature, because if not, the food gets into their body and then it'll just stagnate.
Right, it'll just rot in there.
Yep, and so that's not good for the alligator. The other thing about him, I'm going to take him back from you for a second, because I'm going to see if maybe we can get him to open his mouth. You going to open your mouth? No? No? Okay. If we were to get him to open his mouth, we'd notice something about that. And that is that he cannot open his mouth and his throat at the same time. And that may seem strange, but when you think about it, this is an aquatic animal or semi-aquatic animal. He's going to be in the water most of the time. And when he's in the water, and especially eating, he's going to eat in the water. He's going to be eating fish. He's going to eat pretty much anything that he can get in the way of a live animal, or even some carrion. But when he does that, he has super powerful jaws. But his jaws aren't really built for taking a bite out of something. Your teeth are better for that than his are, because they go past each other. Mm-hmm. His do not, so he has to grab onto something, and he's going to do something called the death roll, and that means he's going to spin around, and when he does, he's tearing pieces off of that. And some alligators will get together and feed that way, because it's much easier for them to tear up the food if they're all working at it together. So sometimes you see this gruesome sight where you see crocodiles tearing apart. Yes, especially if they're in Africa, they've got a wildebeest and they're tearing this poor thing apart.
Off a cliff.
And it is really disgusting to watch. But again, this is nature, and this is how these guys function. And they're very good at what they do. Sometimes they will sit in a stream and they will have their mouth open like this with the water flowing by them. And if they feel a fish come and touch their tongue, boom, their mouth shuts immediately. And so that response is there. And that's why their tongues can't stick out of their mouth, because they'd wind up chopping their tongues off immediately. Yes. But the reason that throat stays closed when their mouth is open, if they didn't, they'd fill up with water.
They'd drown themselves.
Yep, they'd fill up with water, and that would not be good. He'll get a lot more brown as he's older too. When he gets much larger, it's easier for him to maintain his body temperature, because simply by virtue of his size. Yeah. So, all right, we'll get him in. We're going to talk about another type of reptile too, and that would be, what do you think?
The turtle.
The turtles. Yeah. Whoops.
Whoa.
Turtles are amazing creatures, because there's so many of them. There are turtles that live specifically in the ocean. There are turtles and tortoises especially that live completely on land.
On dry land.
And that there are some that are semi-aquatic. So lots of different shapes and colors and forms of turtles. And the first one we're going to talk about is a turtle that we see right in our backyard, very, very commonly. And this is something that is a very common turtle, but we don't see it as often as it is common, because we see it most of the time. We're going to see this turtle crossing the road, and it's crossing the road in the late spring and early summer, because it's a female going to lay its eggs. So what kind of turtle is this?
This is a snapping turtle.
This is a common snapping turtle, yes. And this one, by the way, don't try this at home.
No, I'm not gonna.
This turtle was raised from a little baby. And we at Creature Teachers always say we are not going to take animals out of the wild. This is an exception. We found this turtle on a November morning crossing the road as a quarter-sized baby, and knew that it was not going to make it through the winter. So we took it home. We raised it with the intention of releasing it in the springtime, and it's worked out to be such a great educational creature for us that we've hung on to it. It is now almost 4 years old.
Wow.
And you could see the growth rate of this guy.
Yeah.
They can live to be 50 years old. Common snapping turtles are only going to get to be about 35 pounds. 35 pounds is a big turtle.
It's a big turtle.
And a lot of times people will say, oh, I saw one that was 100 pounds. We tend to exaggerate and think that it was that big. And of course, being such a scary looking creature, that makes it that much larger. But they are going to be about 35 to 40 pounds. Now, there is one in the southern United States called an alligator snapping turtle. Those ones do get quite a bit larger.
Like a big tire.
They are huge, and they can get up to 200 pounds, and they feed a bit differently too. We noticed that this guy's got a very long neck, and he uses that long neck to lunge out and grab his food. So he's got this beak. They don't have teeth, they've got a beak, and that beak has a point on it, so he can grab onto food, and when he does, he's got powerful, powerful jaws, and he just grabs onto that, and that's how he winds up eating. Alligator snapping turtles have a much larger head to shell ratio, but they don't have that long neck. And what they're doing is they're going to sit there with their mouth open. And with their mouth open, they've got this little appendage inside that kind of wiggles around like a worm. And the fish will swim right in their mouth thinking that it's something to eat, and they close their mouth and eat it. So that's another wonderful turtle. Now turtles we see have shells on them, and that's going to be one of their forms of defense. But if we were to look at the inside of this turtle shell, we'd notice that it's got what looks like a spine going right down it. And that's basically because that's what it is.
Connected to the shell.
Yes, it is. It's kind of an extended spine here. And we're seeing this is called the carapace of the turtle, and this underneath is called the plastron. And that will really vary considerably from turtle to turtle. Some turtles, like box turtles for instance, I think we may have used those in another show, have a way to completely enclose themselves in their shell. Because they're a land turtle, and being a land turtle, they're going to be subject to things like raccoons and stuff trying to eat them. And if they can close their shell up, that's going to help them out a lot.
Safer.
Snapping turtles don't need to worry too much about that because they can be very aggressive. This neck can lunge out if they're on land.
All the way back
yes,
here.
And so that's why when we if you were to handle this animal in the wild, we would hold it like this.
Yeah. Like
because
at the very
we can hang
end.
onto the back of the shell. We're not going to pick it up by the tail either because
No,
that can injure
that'll
it.
really injure
so
its
we're
spine.
we're just holding it like this, and it can push its feet past my fingers, and we can still move it from one place to another. I strongly suggest that you do not do that, though. You don't want to handle these turtles at all if you can avoid it. If you need to get them across the road or something and there's no other way, then you can. But other than that, this can be a very, very dangerous turtle simply because of how powerful that jaw is. And so these are aquatic turtles, almost completely aquatic. Except for laying their eggs on shore, they're going to spend the majority of their life underwater. I very seldom see them even sunning themselves like some turtles do.
Yeah, never
we
see
have
that.
Painted turtles, which sometimes they call sun turtles.
Those little guys with the orange and the yellow.
Right, and they'll be out sunning themselves, where these guys are going to be, the only thing I ever see of snapping turtles is you might see their nose sticking up out to get a breath of air.
Just their little eyes.
Yeah, and when they move, they're quite slow. So I can always tell if I'm canoeing along and I see something coming up, it's either going to be a stick, or if it starts to go down very slowly, I know that it's a snapping turtle. It's a dead giveaway right there. And we could see just how powerful even the legs are on this. Yeah, he's got these big, huge front feet with webbed feet so that he can swim along. He spends a lot of his time just sitting on the bottom. And because he looks like a big lump of mud, he's just going to sit there in camouflage and wait for things to swim by him. He can't swim as fast as a fish can, so he has to use the element of surprise, and he's got to be able to just kind of lunge out and grab them.
Yeah.
And I originally thought that these guys were exclusively carnivores and just eating fish and
little worms and things.
Right, they'll eat frogs, they'll eat baby ducks and things like that. However, come to find out, they do eat a lot of vegetation as well. And one of the things I found is a big treat for this guy are cranberries. He loves to eat cranberries. And we don't give them to him all the time, but a friend of mine told me about it, and I thought, what a crazy thing. But then I thought, well, we see them in cranberry bogs quite a bit. And so when we see them in those cranberry bogs, there's no reason why they wouldn't be coming up and eating cranberries. Cranberries float, and they come up and they eat them. And that's what he does. We'll throw a handful in there, and he just kind of comes up and grabs those cranberries. So he's got quite the varied diet. But he is an aquatic turtle. And so when we call them turtles, we refer to them as the aquatic ones as turtles. And we see sea turtles as well, which are truly aquatic. They only come up to lay their eggs as well. So we're going to see those, and some of those turtles can get really, really large. Leatherback sea turtles are huge. And again, there's a concern about populations of sea turtles around the world. I've been fortunate enough to go places where the populations have been up there, and we've seen many, many sea turtles. When you're scuba diving, you see a lot of sea turtles and stuff. But and they're extremely graceful underwater. Their flippers are just so long when they move, and so they're wonderful. But we also have some turtles that live specifically on the land too. So let me, I'm gonna, you know what?
Don't hand him to me.
I'm gonna hang on to him, but I'm gonna have you grab
Okay.
the other box right here, and we're gonna see what else we brought with us. And this one's a little bit difficult. You have to lift that up and slide it that way. Yep, you got it.
Ah,
Okay.
look at that.
And
Oh my God.
very strange tortoises here.
Hello.
And I'm going to hand both of them to you. If
Yes.
I can. There we go.
Oh, they're so weird.
And they do not look like most tortoises we're used to seeing.
What?
What do they look like to you?
Pancakes.
They look like pancakes. Hence the name pancake tortoise. Most of the time when we see tortoises, we see a very high shell. And most of the time when we see aquatic turtles, we're seeing a thin shell because, or not thin per se, but a flattened out shell because they need to be able to get through the water. And just to be more hydrodynamic, they're going to have a thinner shell, or a lower shell rather, so they can swim very fast. You would assume the same would go for these guys, but they have that flat shell for a reason. Most of the tortoises we see are going to have a very high dome shell.
Yes.
And these guys have an extremely flat shell. Now, give them a very gentle squeeze, too, and tell me what you think of that.
Oh.
They've got a squishy shell.
It's like
so the first thing we think,
like a sports ball.
we think that there's something wrong with them. Lots of times, if turtles don't get enough calcium in their diet and they don't get enough sunlight, they're going to wind up having shell issues, and we're going to see a soft shell. In this case, that's not the same.
Off.
These, and they can move very quickly too. You want to make sure we watch them. But and we don't think a tortoise is being able to move fast. These have a weird shell because all of this area around all of these plates on their back is basically skin. It's not shell. So they're separated. All these things are separated. What that does is it gives them that flexibility. And that is very important to them because they live in Africa. You'll find them in places like Kenya and Tanzania, and even up into Somalia. And what we see with them is they live in this scrub area that's got a lot of craggy rocks and stuff in it. And what they will do is they tend to live in communities where you'll see a number of these guys together. Lots of times when we see tortoises in the wild, we're seeing one here and one there, sporadically around. But with these, we'll see kind of colonies of these tortoises, and they live in these areas that have a lot of crevices and stuff. And what'll happen is they may be out and about, and if they find danger, they will run back to their crevices. They get in there, and they expand their lungs, which wedges them into the rocks, and they're not going to be able to be pulled out of there. So that is a way that they wind up saving themselves. So even though they don't have that high dome shell, like most tortoises do, that's what's going to save them.
Another thing that are really, really cool about the difference between fully aquatic turtles and not aquatic turtles is their shell covers so much more of their body.
Yep. We see this in the front too. Yeah, and a lot of this is due to the fact that they don't have that water to be able to escape to. Right. So they're going to need to be able to do that. These have a tendency not to pull their heads in quite so much. They use the craggy rocks for their protection, but they still have an awful lot of shell on them. And the other thing is to take a good look at their feet too. Yeah. If you can put that foot up here and we could see something different, we'll see that these ones, the snapping turtle has much more of a webbed foot because it needs to swim. Whereas this one has these big, long, very, very stout toenails because it's going to be digging in the ground. And so many tortoises that live in desert conditions are going to have these long, stout toenails because they dig down. And this has to do with, again, them being able to thermoregulate. Lots of places where they come from, it gets so hot during the day that they're not going to want to stay out there. They're going to go down. So many times we see these animals being crepuscular. We're going to see them in the morning and in the evening, but during the heat of the day, we're not going to see them at all. They're going to go down into those burrows, and it could be 10 to 15 degrees cooler under there. So that's a good place to be.
How many eggs do they typically lay?
I don't really know on these. I know that they are doing a lot of breeding programs with these in zoos. These were rescues here. They are not a common animal. They're even in the wild, they're a concern because their populations are dwindling now, and most of that is due to the pet trade. We see these being sought after because they're such a unique creature, and so we'll see them, for sale in the pet industry. Although the European Union has stopped importing them, or they say they have, they still wind up getting brought into the European Union. But we still see them coming into the United States. So a lot of these zoos are starting these programs, and those are so important because
yes,
we're seeing a lot of very threatened species being saved because of these zoo breeding programs.
They think they're running 1,000,000 miles an hour.
I know it. They're going like crazy. But if they were really warm, they could move like a shot. They can move a lot faster than we're seeing a lot of other tortoises move.
They're so interesting. I love the funky little barbs on their arms that they can pull in and use also as a defense.
Now, what I find so interesting about them is how they, what they eat and how they can get that much nutrition from what they eat.
What do you
They're
eat?
scrub eaters, so they're going to eat a lot of grasses, and they make a food now for those types of tortoises that eat primarily grasses, and it just looks like it's a pellet. And it looks like it's just got grass or hay mashed up into
like
it. It just doesn't look like it has any nutritional value whatsoever. But again, we're talking about animals that are able to survive in these scrub conditions. One of the other big problems with their populations in the wild is that in a lot of the areas where these are native to, they're cutting a lot of the scrub so that they can farm it. They're using it for agricultural reasons. So they're changing the habitat so much that these guys don't even have a place to survive, which is kind of a shame. But I find them to be very, very unique creatures.
They're really cool.
And they're a fairly small tortoise too. They don't get too much bigger than this. There are other ones, and I think we've brought the big sulcata tortoise before that can get to be 400 pounds. So those get really big, but these tortoises stay quite small.
Now, are these both the same sex?
I don't believe so. I think they're both. I'm sorry. I do believe so. I think they're both males. I've not checked them, so I don't really know. But again, we just recently acquired these rescue situations. So.
Do you know if the shell patterns are unique to each turtle?
Yeah, and we see a lot of different colors in these. Of course, the colors are there to help them to camouflage. But we're seeing two very, very unique shell patterns and even colors on these two. So we see them, and you can recognize them many, many times with the scientists are doing studies on these things in the wild. They're actually identifying them by
the shell pattern,
color.
like a fingerprint?
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I know they do that with big sharks as well.
Yep. So, well, turtles are pretty much the last on our list of reptiles. We don't have any worm lizards today, so and we certainly don't have a tuatara, considering those are extremely rare and only indigenous to New Zealand, several islands on New Zealand. I remember as a kid, there were two places in the country you could see them. One was the Bronx Zoo, and one was the
Busch Gardens?
San Diego Zoo.
Oh wow!
I'm not sure where there are
amazing.
any tuataras now. I know they live a long time, but I don't know what their status is these days in the United States. So what we're going to do is we're going to put him back, but we'll keep these guys out. And I'd like to thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Rick. It's always great to educate the public about animals.
So, all right.
So thank you for joining us for this episode of Creature Teachers. See you next time.